Hey everyone, welcome back. Well, apparently the Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz is a Chinese plant. He was groomed by China to become the vice president of the United States of America. Or at least that's kind of what we're supposed to believe, I guess. Because apparently the Chinese were looking for an up-and-coming political star, so they picked some random teacher from 35 years ago who was not in politics at the time. He was in China teaching. So he was teaching in China. China decided, hey, we're going to use you for political purposes. And now, 35 years later? I mean, come on, really? If China had that much influence over our political process, don't you think they would have had walls put in sooner? Or don't you think that, because let's face it, yes, by politician standards, Walz is fairly young. He's, 60 years old, something like that. So he's not an old man, like Trump and Biden, for example. But, I don't know. Personally, I think it would make sense to go after somebody closer to the age of, J.D. Vance. And again, conspiratorial nonsense. Vance has not been groomed by a foreign government, or at least if he has, I have no reason to believe that he has. There's no evidence that he has. So if he has, no evidence is surfaced. So until evidence surfaces, we're going to believe that he has not been groomed by a foreign government to become Donald Trump's running mate. Even though someone his age would make more sense. Not somebody who was a teacher in your country, just a random teacher in your country 35 years ago who was serving in the National Guard. And then, here's what you would have to believe in order for this theory to make any sense at all. Okay? You've got this all-American guy, right? Tim Walz, he's a teacher, he's a football coach, he's in the National Guard. And he is going to get out of the National Guard, run for Congress, and he's somehow going to run for Congress as a Democrat in a very Republican district, and win. Only two Democrats in the history of that district have ever held that office, and Walz was the second of those two. And at the same time, then we're gonna groom him to leave Congress to become the governor of all states, Minnesota. And nothing against I love the state of Minnesota. But why Minnesota? So if you're in Minnesota and you see this, I am not disrespecting your state at all. I love your state. The reason that I'm kind of downplaying Minnesota specifically, you're not a very big state. population-wise. Why wouldn't they go after somebody from, I don't know, Ohio, Pennsylvania? And not even one of the big four. California, Florida, uh, New York, and Texas. Not even one of those necessarily, right? Just one of these moderately big states, right? Illinois, which was actually pretty big. Illinois and Pennsylvania are actually pretty big, but Michigan, Virginia. That. So you're going to get this guy from Minnesota, and you're going to get him to become a congressman from Minnesota. Then you're going to get him to become a governor. And then you're going to make sure that he gets selected as the vice presidential candidate to stand up to Donald Trump, to run against Donald Trump, specifically against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, right? So he's specifically on the ticket against Donald Trump because he was groomed by China 35 years ago. So what? The Chinese knew way back then that Donald Trump was going to be a massive threat that needed to be taken down by a guy by the vice presidential candidate. Not even the presidential candidate, the vice presidential candidate. Come on. A little bit far-fetched here. It takes little to no effort. It literally took me no effort at all to tear that conspiracy theory apart. None. And if you're buying into it, well, the first thing that I'm going to say, if you're buying into that, think for a minute, right? Just think. Think logically about it. Now, I understand conspiracy theorists, they are fond of saying, well, think for yourself. Yeah. If you think for yourself, you'll realize that most of their theories are just absolutely guano. We'll just call it guano. You're bonkers. You're out there. You're nuts. Man, some of you people are nuttier than the stuff that comes out of the back end of the squirrels in my yard. And I'm telling you, these conspiracy theories, they make no sense whatsoever. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Just absolutely ridiculous. If you were going to tell me that J.D. Vance was a Russian plant, or pick any other hostile country, a plant, I'm gonna look into it and realize that there's nothing to it, and say, you know what? You're bonkers. You're nuts. You're crazy. So, for the conspiracy theorists who like to say, think for yourself, do you ever think for yourself? Because thinking for yourself is exactly how you are able to debunk this nonsense. It's crazy. Do you not consider what you're saying before you say it? And by the way, the person that I heard actually spout this nonsense was a sitting United States congressman. I believe he's from Kentucky, maybe? I think he's from Kentucky. I'm not 100% sure on that. James Comer. I think he's from Kentucky. If he is from Kentucky, hey, Kentucky, come get your congressman, huh? Yeah. It makes no sense. 35 years ago, he taught in China so that he could become the vice presidential candidate now. Why the vice presidential candidate, not the candidate? Not the presidential candidate. Makes no sense. And why would he wait so long to get into politics? And 35 years ago, Donald Trump, when he would talk about running for president, everybody just laughed it off because everybody knew that he was never really going to do it. Well, until the day that he actually did, but that's a whole other story for another time. But, I mean, he was always kind of a clownish candidate. Anyway, when somebody tells you something ridiculous, first thing you need to think is that even plausible? How likely is that? And then, if your own brain cells can't debunk it, you've got the entirety of all information knowable to mankind at your fingertips. Look it up. I'll see you next time.